back. This is episode number 53 of Calibrated with Scott. I'm Scott, of course. I am joined today by my two Twitter Space co-hosts. Zag is the main man. He's the one who always is running the spaces and invites me and my other guest, Clown, up. So, Zag, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, Scott. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to finally be here, and we've spent a lot of time in spaces, debating, talking about this with the Ukraine side as well. So it's nice to be here finally, and I think it's going to be an interesting discussion. We've got a lot to talk about, so I look forward to it.
Absolutely. And Clown, how are you doing today?
I am great. I get to test out my V2 avatar.
It's so weird looking.
I know, right? I love that
weird.
It kind of doesn't get my movement, so it spazzes out sometimes.
If you guys don't know, Zag and Clown both have Twitters. You should go follow them. They are excellent sources. Zag puts out a lot of very informative tweets. Clown puts out a lot of quotes, absolutely trashing on other Twitter accounts. So that's always a fun and enjoyable time reading those. But we're just going to get right into it today. We all talk about Ukraine, so we're just going to keep talking about Ukraine and the SMO going on in Ukraine. And we are coming up on the 5th week of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. How do you guys see it going? Where do you see it going? And what do you think is next for the AFU?
That's a tough one. There isn't much info, much verifiable info coming out from a counteroffensive. That's a problem. It's hard to follow. But from what I understand, they've graduated from rolling armor columns across empty fields with no air cover under full drone surveillance right into minefields and artillery kill zones into trying to widen the line of contact, because that's what you don't want to do when going up against defense and death, because making you do that is a point of defense and death. So I have no idea what the thinking behind what's going on is.
Yeah, I don't either. Zag, do you have any idea what's going on?
I mean, so the first week was intriguing, right? All this talk about breaching the security zone. Well, that didn't happen. And we, as Vaughn pointed out, we saw countless videos, tragic videos of brigades stuck in minefields, negotiating through that, injuries, of course, deaths likely. And of course, the vaunted Leopard tank, many images of these burnt out, including Bradley's too. Not a good look for Western military industrial complex. And then, of course, the dam situation led to all this talk about Kherson. It's been quiet. The nuclear power plant, lots of talk about mining that. It's been quiet. But the one thing I'm interested in is what's going on in Seversk with the Russian military. It seems that they're opening a new front, and the Ukrainians will have to deal with that. So it's been 5 weeks, like you said, and I think it's going worse than intended. And I think it's going to end up fizzling out, and they're going to end up being the defenders against a Russian counteroffensive. That's just my thought.
So 4 weeks ago, before this thing kicked off, where did you guys think it would end up? Where did you think that the Ukrainians would end up getting bogged down? Would they completely succeed? What was your thinking on it, Clown?
I mean, I've been saying for months that the logical and obvious strategic play is Zaporozhye to sever the rail connection at Melitopol, which was so obvious that that's where the Russians fortified, because it doesn't make sense to hit anywhere else. But even that only makes sense if you follow up. And I wasn't convinced, and I'm still not, that I have the means to first make it happen and second follow up on it, because it's pointless unless you also pop the bridge and then veer south to take on the now isolated Crimea. But the problem there is, and I've been hearing this in Ukrainian OSN spaces, there's food and supply for a year or two for the army in Crimea. Severing it now isn't even really that useful unless you're able to siege it. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't have high hopes for the Ukrainian counteroffensive because they're limited in capability and options. That's the only option. They're limited in capability of of how to do it. What are you gonna do instead? Like refocus on Artemovsk? I don't know.
Yeah, it's very odd, and them moving in the direction of Artyomsk is weird. I don't understand it. I watched a video today of, you know, a convoy rolling down this road, just getting picked off one by one by one. And it was right next to Ivanivsky. So once again, the Ukrainians are pushing men and material back into this meat grinder after, you know, they were kind of done with it, and you didn't have to continue expending resources in this pointless manner. Zach, how far did you think they were going to get?
Actually, hold up. I'm kind of curious to see if I'm kind of curious to see if they're going to try to roll armor across the now drained reservoir because it's drying up.
Yeah.
But then you're doing the same thing in a different place where you're rolling in armor across an open field under full drone surveillance into artillery kill zones and probably minefields
with less cover because they're in the middle of a drained reservoir. And
yeah, they have to bring all their forward air defense too if they're going to try to cross the reservoir, because that's a large crossing, and I think Russian aerospace forces would be engaged, helicopters, Su-24s, right? I mean, no doubt.
I don't even know how you would get across, because the Russians could just sit on the far bank with ATGM crews and just pick off anything that comes across. It makes no sense to me, that whole thing.
Yeah, and the Ka-52s are 13-mile range on the Vickers missile.
Yeah.
So I mean, they can sit back well out of the range of Ukrainian armor. I thought they would make a push towards Melitopol, as Clown was saying, and then I think they would try to cut off the port of Berdyansk. They've been striking it repeatedly with their storm shadows. I'm not sure what they're trying to hit, but it's generally concentrated around the port. So we also heard the Russians have built lots of fake ammo depots. So I don't know if that's something they've been targeting, because we haven't seen one of those massive explosions there yet. So I thought that's what they would do, again, to try to cut off Crimea and the supply, even just temporarily. But then Clown pointed out they got 1 to 2 years worth of supplies there for the army. So that would make no sense. So I still think a lot of this is simply for show. NATO pushed it. Here we have your new weapons. Use them, show off, come on. And it's backfiring.
Yeah. And not only that, not only would they have a year's supply, but also how does Ukraine go about denying naval, how do they set up a naval blockade? Because even if you cut the bridge, you're still going to have ships coming across. They're not going to bring maybe everything you need all the time. You're going to be lower, but you're still going to be able. I mean, that would extend the siege far beyond what Ukraine is capable of doing. So it really makes no sense to me. What I'm starting to think is that the maximum goal was what they had stated for their audience purposes, but the realistic goal to me looks like that they were going to try and seize the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. I think that was the maximum goal that they were going for. Once they have the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, they have this bridgehead, they have some security around it, then they can use that as a staging point for further advancements. I think that's what the Novokakhovka Dam explosion was on day number 2. I think they were expecting the first 2 days to go much better for them around Orikhiv, and then once the river dried up, a second grouping would come across the Dnieper down by Kherson and make more impact. And I just think the whole thing kind of got derailed with the first 2 weeks of this offensive going so poorly, and then they almost switched to a plan B and went over to the ledge in southern Donetsk, right up against the Zaporozhye border. And now it just looks like they're trying anything, going anywhere. Bakhmut, Avdiivka, trying to do something, just trying to get any victory around the map. Do you guys think that they're going to try any large assault before the July 11th NATO summit?
See, that's what has me thinking. Because if we listen to Thainer and friends, the venerable surrender expert, they're keeping most of their forces for this counteroffensive in reserve.
Yeah.
which, and they have us they're convinced that these are all just shaping and probing operations, but as we said earlier, they're widening a line of contact, which suggests that these aren't probing operations, that this is the offensive.
Yeah.
So then how much are
This
they
is the NATO
actually
brigade, right?
Yeah, the 47th has been used. The 47th was the one that got rocked. That was the Bradley Leo group. And then they've used, I'm pretty sure, almost all of their other brigades, at least battalion sized units of these brigades in different areas around the front. So yeah, they're definitely digging into their offensive resource pool that was supposed to be used directly in Zaporozhye. Do you I mean, unless you're David on Twitter and you think that Ukraine has some 36 brigades waiting somewhere to go.
that's what the surrender expert also keeps saying, but the question is, what's going on with this? Are they assuming that these are 36 full brigades by the spec, which would be unimaginable, or are these a bunch of half brigades or quarter brigades? And why even hold them in reserve, especially if you're shifting strategy from probing into widening? Because I guess I'll go into a bit more detail about this for listeners' sake. Is if anyone's not familiar with defense and debt, a lot of people think it's just fortifications and behind fortifications, behind fortifications, behind fortifications. But the idea is to strategically seize area for the attacker to fill on with the idea that the larger area an attacking force covers, the more it thins itself out, the faster it exhausts itself, and the less concentration of force it has, and by definition, following from that, has less offensive capability. So if they are falling into that trap and widening the line of contact, they are reducing their force concentration and reducing their offensive capabilities. They would have to reinforce that. So why they're holding everyone in reserve unless they really do not understand what's happening?
So what I'm hearing from both of you is that this is not going as well as even we thought it was going to go. I thought that they were going to reach Tokmak, and that's where they were going to get slowed down. I figured they would get through maybe to that first defense line, potentially through that first defense line, and then that's where the Russians would stop them. But that has not happened. So with how bad everything's going, what do you guys expect from the July 11th NATO summit? And what do you expect the Ukrainians to do? Because obviously the offensive isn't working. I don't think they're going to be able to put anything together in the next 9 days to change the calculus on this whole thing. So they have to do something to either gain attention, or perhaps the decisions have already been made about what's going to happen at the NATO summit. I don't know. What do you guys think is going to happen?
Wait, they haven't reached the first defensive line yet?
Nope.
No, not in any case.
Oh,
Armstrong.
tabarnak, that's
I mean,
wow.
I think the NATO summit's they're gonna hem and haw quite a bit. There's gonna be lots of nice juicy PR stunts. There gonna be some phony commitments made. Oh yes, we're gonna look into more equipment. Yes. But at the end of the day, I think NATO's gonna make a pretty blunt offer to Kiev. They'll say, this isn't going very well for you. You got two choices. We can talk about peace terms, or we can offer you a deployed forward unit in Lviv area. That way, if Russia does anything, we could always say to them, listen, be careful. We now have an actual peacekeeping unit. Official NATO is in Ukraine because it's going so badly for them. We need to ensure that you guys don't carry out more missile strikes in vulnerable civilian areas, wink, wink. Because my sources indicate Ukraine's got very limited air defense out of cities like Kiev. It goes down dramatically as far as the units they have there.
Yeah.
So especially as you go further west, I think NATO's going to have to do something like that if they want to maintain any sort of, leadership position in the future dialogue here. Otherwise, it will unravel. I think if Ukraine's counteroffensive ends officially, the people are going to start to question what's going on here. The people of Ukraine. I think this is sort of, I don't want to say end all be all of it, but given the effectiveness of Russian helicopters, Russian artillery, they haven't even left the security zone. NATO's going to have to offer Ukraine something substantial, like we will deploy a brigade to help you keep peace, but that will come at costs. Like you're probably going to have to negotiate and lose territory. One way or the other, I think maybe by the end of the summer you'll start seeing peace talks. I mean, that's my hope, but
Does that feel like what's going on at all? It doesn't. The rhetoric isn't there for that.
If they
Zero.
deploy a brigade, I think NATO politically would be more inclined to say, all right, we're now committing to you and your defense, not just in like paper and name, but we're actually like here are the flags of each country in the NATO and the NATO fatigues. Like we are now officially with you, which means that you and the Russians are going to have to figure this out. We won't have any of our guys die. The New York Times will not get to write a hit piece about this.
So I have a question. It's illegal for the current government to negotiate with Russia. They could change that, obviously. It doesn't feel like Russia needs to negotiate at all. I mean, they're in a position of strength, so they could if they wanted to. And the West doesn't seem like they have any appetite to negotiate. They're not talking about it at all. They're actually talking about the opposite, sticking with Ukraine for as long as it takes, Ukrainian victory, whatever, so on and so forth. I'm really having a hard time seeing how negotiations are going to come out of this. And this is an idea that I've kind of been pushing a little bit, and it's all of the rhetoric surrounding the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. It feels to me like this is the Western playbook again. The second things start going bad, the second you're about to lose, you try to freeze a conflict, just like they did in Syria. And I feel like they're going to do it here instead of chemical weapons. It's going to be a nuclear incident. I feel like that's the playbook. It gives, it's a false flag. It gives NATO legitimacy to go in and try to control the situation by some means, not as a combatant probably, but just going in there and their presence being felt may deter the Russians from any further action and could actually lead to a long-term frozen conflict. Do you guys think that that's a realistic possibility?
Yes, but not yet.
Not yet.
I think what we'll see on 11th is commitments for ATACMS and F-16s.
Yeah, you think F-16s even after?
I mean, there's so many people. There's so many people. Well, there's I didn't say American F-16s.
Yeah, no, the British representative to NATO said to not expect an announcement on F-16s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I can't see them not doing it unless they've been reading my Twitter and have paid attention to my lengthy analyses on why it's the way they're doing it, the way they're talking about doing it is a very bad idea that will get a lot of Ukrainian pilots killed, because 4 months training, I read the quote unquote leaked report everyone else is referring to on why 4 months is possible. That's for a basic skill set on an F-16.
Yeah.
You have pilots with mastery of fulcrums and flankers, and you want to send them in with a basic skill set on another platform that atrophies their skills on their native platform.
Yeah,
because they're somehow going to be more effective. I expect to see it eventually, just because of how much noise there is for it. But I maintain that it is a terrible idea unless they're willing to take the full 18 months of training.
Yeah,
but by then it's gonna be way too late.
It's better than nothing, though, Vaughn. I mean,
it's not better. It's not better than nothing, because it atrophies their skills on their MiGs and
when will they get enough MiGs to replenish? But sort of, for me, it's like get used to the new machine.
But Zag, think about what nothing would mean. If they had nothing, now you're looking at a stark reality where you actually have to face the truth of the situation. When you have nothing, if you have the hope of something coming in the future, you're going to keep fighting, right? But if there is nothing on its way, you're forced to negotiate. I mean, there's no, you're looking at, okay, now I'm definitely going to lose. How can I lose as little as possible? And that needs to be the just the zeitgeist change in Kiev. It has to shift from we're going to win this through Western support or Western intervention and into how can we reduce the damage that's going to be done to Ukraine. I think we're way past that. I think the second Russia decided to mobilize, this whole thing was kind of basically wrapped up. They came to a decision after months and months of attempting to negotiate with the West in Ukraine. It just didn't end up resulting in anything beneficial. Once again, the Russians left Kiev, which might have been a planned withdrawal. It might have been a forced withdrawal just based on the situation. But the timing is very weird. And the way Putin presents it, it makes a lot of sense. And it goes along with what a lot of people on Twitter have at least been saying, that, Boris Johnson came in and sabotaged negotiations. The State Department came in and sabotaged negotiations, whatever, between Zelensky's cabinet and Moscow. So I don't see negotiations being on the table at all, which is super unfortunate for the Ukrainian people. So
if negotiations are out of the question, and we've seen forward deployed NATO mercenaries in Kramatorsk,
yeah,
what's the likelihood, in both of your opinions, that military stuff, it's much harder to, for the public to determine who's flying the plane, correct?
Yeah.
What's to stop NATO from saying, here are the 12 F-16s or 20 F-16s or 24, whatever, that we've donated. We've landed them at one of the 2 airfields in your country that's not totally ruined. And Ukrainian pilots will be expected to start flying missions soon. I mean, who's to say that these aren't going to be Western pilots? The only thing that one could figure out is if they get shot down and someone ejects and the Russians capture them, they say, hey, look, here's this Dutch pilot flying in Ukraine. Aha, we told you. So then what? I mean, it
becomes fairly obvious fairly quickly, to be honest, even before shooting them down. If they're flying the F-16s like they were flying their MiGs, then these are not Ukrainian pilots.
Yeah.
These are flying Tigers.
Yeah.
But there's one thing that nobody talks about having Western aircraft in Ukraine. The friend or foe systems work at that point. They haven't worked so far because they're both fly the same planes.
Yep.
Well, granted, Russia has the modernized versions of them, but still, the friend or foe. This was a huge problem in Georgia. The friend or foe systems did not work.
Yep.
It
was also a huge problem on the ground at the start of the Ukraine conflict, when everything was so fluid. You had no idea who was where. You saw, there was that video of those Russians that just casually walked up to those Ukrainians. They're speaking the same language, and they're asking them where their bands are, and the Russian special operations guys say, oh, whatever, and then they end up shooting them and killing the Ukrainian guys, and that's just confusion based off everybody speaking the same language, driving the same equipment, so on and so forth.
Yeah, the F-16s would be broadcasting across the airwaves that they are in fact F-16s. They are in fact not Russian planes.
Yeah, there'll be no question. You can fire instantly at whatever you see.
So it's a software issue, right? Right. So that makes a lot of sense. You rarely heard that from the Ukrainian camp. These analysts never suggested, oh, it's been easier because there's the friend or foe system. Yeah. It's confusing, and you need to run mass software updates across all of your infrastructure. That takes time, right? I mean, so this is a very complicated dynamic when you're using the same equipment.
But even that, it's a disadvantage to have working friend or foe systems for Ukraine, because now your planes are broadcasting that they're your planes. There's no confusion. They will be shot the second there's a blip. Yeah.
And on top of that, another thing that people never talk about when it comes to this is that there is there's always the analysis I see from the pro-Ukrainian side, and they just seem to completely ignore that there is an entire army in front of them. They talk about things like, oh yeah, give us the F-16s. People don't understand what operating Western aircraft entails. First off, you need a runway. So we've seen MiGs taking off of highways, Su-25s taking off of highways. You can't do that with an F-16. And you need a lot of logistics to operate mechanically F-16s. You need mechanics to operate F-16s. And they have to be at airfields. So the Russians are going to know exactly where they are. They're going to be able to annihilate these airfields, and then F-16s for what? I don't think they're going to receive them because I just don't think that they have any place on the battlefield. But I do think that they're going to receive the ATACMS ballistic missile. I feel like that is just the last desperate step that the West has to, I don't know, try to escalate the conflict, try to get Russia to do something that would garner NATO involvement. I think that that's the play now. I really don't see any other way out other than the U.S. taking a massive L and this whole investment going down the drain, which I also can't see happening. Do you guys, the Ukrainians have the Storm Shadow. The Storm Shadow is a cruise missile that flies on a much more difficult trajectory to intercept. Does the ATACMS provide anything to Ukraine that Ukraine doesn't already have, or will it provide any real advantage through this counteroffensive?
I mean,
It can
ATACMS.
Oh, sorry,
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Zag.
Oh, it can just simply force the Russians to have some more logistical headaches by pushing back supply depots and staging areas. That's probably it. I mean, but other than that, I don't know it can do much more than what they're already doing.
Vaughn?
I mean, it's a different tool in our belt. They have projectile ammunition they wouldn't have had before.
Yeah.
I think the important thing is to, which we don't see a lot of, especially on the Ukrainian side, is approaching this analytically and rationally, and not treating these like the new Wunderwaffe, because they're not. There is no new Wunderwaffe. If there's anything that's seen in this theater that comes close to having the designation of Wunderwaffe, it's the Lancets, and unfortunately, they're not getting any of those.
Absolutely.
So it's, how do I say, there aren't that. I think the Storm Shadows are more effective weapons on paper, or at least in practice even, but they're limited by launch platforms. There aren't that many Sukhoi 24s left. As far as I know, it's the only platform Ukraine has that could launch them. This is an argument for F-16s, but you still there's still a training issue. So it gives them an extra tool in their belt to hit at range, and that's what needs to be looked at as. So it won't fundamentally change anything, because these are much more vulnerable than Storm Shadows because they're ballistic. I mean, the whole premise of air defense is, if you know how fast it's going and what arc it's on, you know where you need to aim to intercept it.
Yeah, we saw how well Ukrainian air defense did with the Iskander that hit the bridgehead. Yeah, well, non-existent. You can't stop a ballistic missile coming in. That Iskander is basically hypersonic if it's given enough space to fly. Yeah. So
technically all ballistic missiles reach Mach 5 at least, but the Iskander does micro course corrections, and that fucks up the calculations for ballistic missile interception.
Yeah. And so, like, real quick, Scott, sorry, like a lot of trusted analysts were saying things like, the Iskander's so effective, Russia has a lot of varying models. Why not use those to attack Ukrainian front line positions of force concentration where they park their vehicle, go after them with these ballistics and completely shell shock the West in this? Doesn't seem to be happening. Why are the Russians still operating with white gloves? I'm unsure.
I think it's just cost expense ratio for the Russians. The ballistic missiles like Iskander, they take quite a bit of time to orient and fire. So if you have like a barracks or something, that's what you want to hit with those, troop concentrations. We saw that with the strike in Kramatorsk. But when it comes to like frontline positions, it's kind of hard to, I think personally, to really, make a good argument for why you need to use a ballistic missile on, a frontline position, especially when you have things like fabs and stuff like that work equally as well. And you don't have to build a missile for that. You just throw wings on an old bomb. So I think
I guess
that's why
Ukrainian cope saying things like, oh, the Russians should use ballistics because ballistics work because, as you can see, they're not shot down by Ukrainian air defense.
Yeah.
So yeah, that might be a cope argument. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, look at the glide bombs. The glide bombs have been very effective, and there hasn't really been an answer to them.
Yeah.
I should specify the Russian glide bombs because there has been an answer to the American glide bombs. That's GPS jamming.
Yeah, the
Yep.
JDAMs have had almost no effect. I mean, I think I've seen like 3 or 4 JDAM videos of them actually hitting something where I've seen hundreds of Russian glide bomb videos. So there is
Yeah, Scott, you were
definitely
right
a
out front on
disparity.
those. You've been out front on those glide bomb videos for months now. And
Yeah.
where is it? Marinka, they were being used. One of the suburbs of Avdiivka, yeah, suburb of the city of Donetsk, yeah. And there was nothing one could do to stop them.
No.
And it almost looked effortless.
And that whole area as well has had so little air defense for such a long time. We've been seeing a lot of Su-25 close air support in that area. So that particular area of the front is so heavily fortified. I think the Ukrainians didn't think that they needed as much air defense there. So then the Russians have just been bombing the living hell out of that place. So I just want to pivot now away from Ukraine. I think we've covered almost everything that's going on there, to the situation in Europe. France is in turmoil right now. We'll see if it continues. It started out as pension protests, I think, right? That's what it was. And then it ended up turning into full-scale rioting and looting. I'm no France expert, so I'm not going to overly talk about this, but if you guys have anything you want to talk about with regards to this, I'm more than yours.
Why don't you go ahead, Vaughn? This is your sort of your wheelhouse, the Francophone.
Kinda. Like, I'm not a France expert. I'm just half French, so I have some insight into it. Because living in a former French colony, we have a culture derived from theirs, right?
Yeah.
This started as France being France, and it got big because of opposition to pension reforms. But then it became sort of a French BLM where some kid got shot. The police tried to cover it up, and all hell broke loose. And now there's roving bands with RPGs and AKs in the streets and fucking lions running through Saint Denis. And I'm never gonna let go that I saw videos of lions running through the streets of Saint Denis, because what the hell is that?
Yeah, that's crazy. It definitely got out of control, where it was just pretty much, there was some targeting of government buildings like town halls and police stations, but for the most part, it was random arson and looting of private businesses. I really don't, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of direction. Do you think that, oh, go ahead.
As far as I know, they don't have political demands. Like, this set doesn't have, like, the anti-reform people and anti-pension reform people had political demands. These don't, unless the implicit demand is please no shoot minorities, which I get, but you have to vocalize that out loud.
Yeah. It's probably the best thing that could happen for not the best thing that could happen for Macron, but in terms of the scale of these protests, them not having any real direction makes it look like chaos, and chaos is not what people want. And it also makes it look like it will burn itself out here rather soon. Usually when you have no direction, you really,
Hasn't it spread?
Huh?
Isn't it now in Belgium? Isn't there an example of one of these in
Belgium and somewhere else?
Italy?
Switzerland as well.
Switzerland. So if this is going on in Switzerland, so I mean, if it goes to Italy, Italy is a powder keg.
Yeah.
These are these Club Med countries, the pigs. Some insert a double I in it for Ireland and Italy, Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, Spain, right? If these types of movements, now probably France, if these types of movements spread there, because there's very few services for the youth, especially the first and second generation immigrant youth. And the opportunities are incredibly limited in countries like that for any young person.
Yeah.
And just understanding your fate is going to cause a lot of unrest. And that's probably what we're seeing with this class of people doing this. And I think it could, if certain friends of ours are correct that there are intelligence agencies involved in fomenting this unrest and making it continent wide, right? That could be a real problem for the European Union and their legitimacy when it comes to elections and just maintaining their sort of globalist order. Because this is, if you get an organic movement, a violent movement, they're pulling citizens out of cars and beating them. Like, this is not a
there's like
typical
legitimate
union strike,
lynchings
you know?
going on.
Yeah, this isn't a union strike. They're like breaking doors down, is what the rumor is, of randomly. Like, there must be drugs involved here as well.
Yep.
There's probably money. You're seeing American and Russian made rifles being used, which means they're being laundered in the black market from somewhere. So this is serious. And like, if people are right that this is like an FSB or Chinese operation, I mean, this is very well done. And if that's true, as an American, I'm very, very nervous about an infiltration here, because, you know, the left infiltrating is one thing. We got it. BLM, Antifa, fine. Bunch of pajama boys. But if there's infiltration from foreign states, and that's very scary. What with the Mexican border being so porous, like, this is not something you want to see, because as goes Europe, goes America. So this is something to really keep, you know, our eye on, and probably the analysts should focus a little bit more time on this, like, long term, because I think it's going to get worse.
And I've always
I don't
said,
know. There's
go ahead.
I don't know that there's direct foreign influence here. In the case of France, this is a long time coming. There's a lot of social divisions between immigrants from the francophonie. Sorry, I struggle saying French words in English because my brain. I'm a French speaker. My brain thinks them in French, right? Yeah, there's always been there's always been social divisions between native Frenchmen and people from African francophonie. Now, a foreign state would want to exploit that, but do you really need to? And getting
What about the weapons,
getting AKs isn't hard if you still have contacts in North Africa.
Yeah.
Not that I would know anything about this. You know, with relatives in West Asia, I plead the fifth, even though I'm not American.
Right. The Syrian connection, yes, that's been speculated.
Like the arms running through the black market is nowhere near as uncommon or difficult as people think. If you have the connections and you have the means, I mean, it wouldn't surprise them. It's not complicated. It's not hard. Also, several months ago, I was at a family function, and one of my lay people cousins, who was really not into politics or war or international relations at all, pulls me aside because this is my domain, and he was telling me that he was seeing anti-tank missiles and stuff of the type that were being sent to Ukraine on the dark web.
Yeah,
for sale. So that's another option as well.
I don't think that there's necessarily direct foreign involvement. Obviously, like Clown said, if you want to piggyback on it, that could definitely be a thing that's happening. But what I think you're beginning to see is as we're getting into the summer months, you know, gas and oil production has been cut by both OPEC Plus and Russia. So that is starting to hit. It's definitely starting to hit here where I'm at. And, you know, as that, I mean, Zag put it exactly right. You know, first and second generation immigrants that are coming over, they're the first ones who are going to be exposed to the worst of the downturn of the economy, right? You know, finding work illegally or legally is difficult already in the EU. And as the economic situation continues to deteriorate in a lot of these countries, I mean, I expect Germany to have the exact same thing happening in very little amount of time. France is the canary in the coal mine. I think they're the most unstable in the EU in terms of their demographic disposition and their propensity for you know, protest and riots. So I think that this is a good look at what could be coming over the next 6 months to a year in the EU. I mean, Germany is already in a recession, looking at potentially a depression. It's not looking great.
I agree
Plus,
about Germany. Just don't tell our friend Kaiser from Twitter
Yeah.
about this. He'd get very
He
upset to
knows.
hear this. He's going to be upset
plus,
when we make him listen to this episode. Oh, no, Scott, no.
honestly, I'm being again half French and on the left, I am kind of afraid of the prospect of Marine Le Pen being able to leverage this into a presidency.
Interesting, yeah.
Um,
I mean, it
um,
makes sense. She's talked about this, hasn't she? She's basically forecast the scenario.
Because the main reason that keeps Macron in power is that although he was only the first choice of about 27.8% of the electorate, left with two bad choices between Le Pen and Macron. Macron has been deemed the least bad choice, and this can be leveraged to flip that around, and that is not a good prospect.
isn't it odd how all of Europe now is beginning to, all of the politics in Europe is the least worst option. It's horrible. I've never seen like people so disillusioned by their choices in their government. I mean, normal people, not the media talking about it. But we saw what, 3 prime ministers in less than 6 months in Britain. It's
Where's the
not.
unelected, Scott? It's the unelected.
Yeah.
Ursula von der Leyen, the European Central Bank, all the people that don't need a vote, the aristocratic elite class that remains there,
Yeah.
generally run by Low Countries or the Germans, right? So this is not unusual for the Europeans. They've basically surrendered their fate to this class of people. I mean, Ursula von der Leyen. Oh, how many cringe comments have we heard from her about this conflict? And remember, God forbid, the where massacre. Her behavior was atrocious. Act shock for the camera. Go, go, go. Oh. That was horrible. This is an act by these people. And these are the unelected. And this is the problem for Europe, in my opinion. They've sold out to this group of people.
I wonder if that was the first body she saw in real life.
Well, I mean, she was told to react a certain way. How can you avoid it? They're all standing there.
Yeah.
And then they go, oh, the camera's rolling, because I saw the long clip and she was normal, and then all of a sudden acted shocked. Like,
yeah.
I don't know. It seemed very manufactured to me. I'm not saying what happened was horrible. Let's not sugarcoat things, but her reaction seemed very staged and very she was acting. Anyway.
Yeah, they all are.
I mean, I'm not gonna go there. I'm not gonna touch that. It's not something I think about. It's not something I comment on. But I mean, in Britain's case, Sunak wasn't really elected, was he? Neither was what's her name? I forget because the head of lettuce lasted longer than her. Liz Truss, right?
Liz Truss, yeah.
Right. She went to meet the Queen, and the Queen out and died of cringe.
Yeah. That's right. She met the Queen and then the Queen died. That's crazy. Yeah, that whole episode was just ridiculous. I don't know why they ever thought she would be decent in that position. I don't.
And then there's my beef with von der Leyen is that the sheer hubris of thinking they could collapse the Russian economy that easily with just a few sanctions, because it's this weird. This is my beef with the EU leadership. They have this historically European arrogance to them, where we'll withdraw trade and then they will beg us to lift these sanctions. I'll do what we say because the privilege of not dealing with us will wound them on a spiritual level or something.
Yeah.
But Europe, nobody fucking cares. Nobody cares. You need those resources more than anyone, more than they need to be sold to you. The entire global South is up and as the global South is rising, and look at the GDP growth figures, and it is slightly terrifying if you're an Atlanticist.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody in the global South is tired of US hegemony. The reason why they're now doing so much better is because of these alternatives, I believe. So, Saudi Arabia is completely lost for the US. I don't know how you botched that as terribly and horribly as you did. just go and make peace with the guy. Why does it have to be some pissing contest between Biden and MBS? I've never understood it. It's never made any sense to me. And the NATO and the United States, the State Department, whoever you want to blame for this, went into this whole operation, this whole I call it the Ukraine plan, with the idea that they were going to, one, destroy the Russian economy, and two, attrit the Russian military to the point where they could never do this again. That was literally a direct quote. The Russian economy is now independent and probably stronger than it was before the war. And the Russian military is now a sharpened knife. I mean, you might consider it depleted in some areas. They don't have as many helicopters, maybe as many planes, as many total men. I mean, they have more total men now, but they don't have their original trained army. But you have a very combat experienced, very competent military that has now had a year and a half to, become the sharpened blade that it is. So I think that this entire project has completely failed. I don't see any success, and the only success I could see is potentially freezing the conflict and somehow, getting a piece of Ukraine into NATO. That's the only way I see it happening. And even then, I don't see the Russians allowing that to happen. So,
I have to concede that Russia has taken a lot of equipment losses. I'm not saying like Oryx level, because the armchair warlord did a pretty convincing takedown on their methodology.
Yeah.
But that is an effect. Like Russia theoretically, and I'll qualify that theoretically in a bit, theoretically cannot do something like this again for a while
right now. Yeah, but the one thing I will say,
I'm qualifying this.
Yeah.
But they have kicked their production lines into gear. I don't think anybody anticipated that.
Yeah.
So I hear a lot of analysts saying, "Oh, they're out for decades." No, maybe years if we're being generous.
Yeah, and not only are they not out for decades, just years, to get back to, maybe if you're talking about the Soviet level of equipment they had, that could take decades because they had so much crap. Not all of it useful, a lot of it lying around. They had so much shit for over, 60 years of preparing, or 40 years of preparing for war with the West and NATO. So I don't think they'll ever get back to that point because I don't think that's necessarily required. But who is their opponent? China is firmly in their camp right now, so they don't have to worry about China. And the only other adversary is NATO, who has completely, at least in Europe, completely disarmed themselves. NATO doesn't have the Soviet stock to fall back on. NATO doesn't have their original NATO stock to fall back on. And some of these NATO countries are now giving away literally their own militaries to Ukraine. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania are all basically completely empty now of military equipment. The Scandinavian countries, they're all counting on the protection of a nuclear blanket and not needing necessarily their batteries of self-propelled artillery. But Russia will have time if they win, they will have time to continue production, and they'll be ahead of the West outside of maybe the United States. But when is the United States and Russia going to come into direct conflict with each other? Probably
likely never.
Yeah, conventional. When will they ever come into conventional conflict with each other?
Never, because that inevitably leads to a nuclear conflagration just by virtue of how the two fight.
Yeah, it would have to. The second an aircraft carrier got hit, or the second
or you start going after each other's supply lines and eventually dual use infrastructure, because there's a long line of precedent for striking electrical infrastructure, industrial infrastructure, because it could be used for the military. And once you go there,
it's over.
Tacticals and trading cities or de-escalatory nuclear strikes are on a table. Yep. Eventually, it's inevitable.
How do you? So the idea around the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant is that either the Russians are going to blow it from undermining it because they control it, or there will be some sort of strike or potentially an attempt to capture it. I don't know. But if we go along with the what I think is the most realistic scenario if this happens, being the Ukrainians are going to use it as an open invitation, because Lindsey Graham and somebody else have already signed basically in a security agreement on this, where if there is a nuclear disaster at the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, that is the casus belli for NATO to become involved in some way. I think that would end up freezing the conflict. I think that that's maybe the goal, is to freeze it because they know where this is headed. But how do you think Russia responds to this? If
I mean, honestly, I don't see freezing a conflict being the answer to a nuclear catastrophe.
but I mean, how do you go about dealing with, if NATO troops enter into Ukraine, do you see Russia striking them? Because I kind of don't.
It depends on who the Russian intelligence will determine like what kind of uniforms they're wearing. If they're in Ukrainian uniforms, bye-bye.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
if they're there as official quote unquote contractors playing dirty and like manning systems and maybe like doing the artillery and like basically doing what the Russian military was doing for the LNR DNR for a while, right? Before those two groups got completely degraded. Like I think that's probably where NATO's next step would be. And then Russia has to make a careful decision. Do we want to do, because like, you know, the Ukrainians weren't striking us initially for the years we were helping LNR DNR. So what do we want to do here, guys? You know, the Kremlin needs to think long and hard about this. But I don't know, like how much more can they take of civilian infrastructure strikes? But let's remember the Crimea Bridge was a terrorist act with a car, not a conventional weapon. So, yeah,
I would like the it would be great if the Russian side would consider the possibility of letting the IEA into IENA into
Hyena.
yep.
yeah.
It's not quite a hyena, it's a French hyena because we don't pronounce our H's. Our hyena, it's letting hyena take over the take over the immediate area of the nuclear plant with the stipulation that they will be moving the spent fuel rods to another facility elsewhere to prevent something like this, because that is honestly the only sane option. I've been reading that the Russians are withdrawing, and if they're withdrawing from a plant, it's because they know something is coming and they're scared.
Yeah.
So negotiate to bring in the hyena, and because normally you don't move spent fuel. It's too radioactive. You leave it in its cooling pond and you let it decay until it's time to move it. But fucking move it.
I mean, if they blow up one reactor, so the rumor that the Russians have planted explosives, I can't believe that's. I don't know. I mean, why would you do this?
Why? That's the whole thing. Why would they do it? It makes no sense. They're beating the offensive. The West is struggling to provide aid in the decent number that Ukraine needs. Mathematically, Ukraine does not have the manpower to continue this fight forever compared to Russia. I mean, Russia is going to win. The longer this goes, the worse it gets for Ukraine. Time is not on Ukraine's side. Why would Russia blow the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant that they firmly control? It makes no sense to me.
That's what's worrying, because if time is on Russia's side, then the longer this goes on, the more desperate the Ukraine side gets, the more likely something at the ZNPP is on a table, and that's why this plant needs to be shut down, honestly.
Yeah, it should. I mean, it's already completely cold, I think. All the reactors are off, but I think that the material is still there. So
yeah, to my understanding, the spent fuel is still there, and that's
is the problem.
That's a problem.
Yeah, but also the good news is it's incredibly hard for things like ATACMS or Storm Shadow cruise missiles to penetrate.
Oh yeah, these things are built like fortresses.
Feet of concrete, yeah.
It's almost like when the Soviets built them, they were aware that there's nuclear reactors inside.
Yeah, almost. Just that much. I think that's where we're going to leave it off today.
Chernobyl was an internal issue, right? Of course.
So Chernobyl melted down. It didn't blow up. It was melted down.
Yeah, it was a mistake.
So all the comparisons to that are very foolish.
Same with 3 Mile, right?
Yep, exactly. That was these are all technical issues with the plant mechanics, not like an external missile strike. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's where I'm going to wrap it up today. That's I think that's almost like 40 minutes. So I thank you so much, guys, for coming on. I appreciate it. We need to start doing this more regularly. We got to get a set time because these conversations are good. If you know, I'm going to put it up at the bottom of the screen, but everybody go follow Clown. Just your Twitter, right, Clown?
Yep.
At Clown. What is it?
At Von Clownsewitz.
Von Clownsewitz, that's right. And then
Clownsewitz. Von Clownsewitz is the real military strategist and my namesake.
Yes. And for Zag, what is yours? It's Zagonel.
It's Zagonel 85, I think, is the actual.
85. You'll see them both down at the bottom. But thank you guys so much for coming on. Thank you everybody for listening. Make sure you go follow, subscribe, and share this if you can. It's the easiest way to help me. Go follow these two guys. They're great sources of information. And listen to Zag's spaces on Twitter. They're some of the best. I go into everybody's spaces, and really none are as good as Zag's. So make sure you go check that out. But you know, and besides
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks for having us, Scott. Always a pleasure. And seconding that about Zag, best spaces bar none.
Yes.
Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it. And you know, we have a good thing going. We should continue this, and it's lovely to be a part of a nice little analyst group here. So lovely. Thank you, Scott. Yes.
Yep. Thank you, everybody. And you know, thank you to all my followers and listeners, and you know, have a good day.